It was Christmas Eve, and I was driving home after a long shift at work. The roads were nearly deserted, the snow falling softly, blanketing everything in a peaceful white. My old sedan hummed along, the heater blasting, and a gentle stream of Christmas music played on the radio. The warmth of the car and the quiet solitude of the road had me almost relaxed, until I saw her. She appeared out of nowhere, standing on the shoulder of the highway, her figure barely visible in the dim glow of my headlights. I slammed on the brakes, my heart lurching in my chest. For a second, I thought she was a trick of the light, but no. There she was. A young woman in a festive red sweater and a matching scarf, clutching a small gift bag. Snow clung to her dark hair, and she looked freezing. Pulling over, I rolled down the passenger window. "Are you okay? Need a ride?" She hesitated, her eyes wide, then nodded. "Yes, thank you. I just need to get into town." Something about her voice sent a small shiver down my spine, but I pushed it aside. She climbed in, and as soon as she shut the door, the temperature in the car plummeted. It was like someone had flipped off the heater, even though it was still on full blast. I cranked it up again, but it didn't seem to make a difference. We drove in silence for a few minutes, and the air inside the car felt heavy, like a weight pressing down on my chest. I glanced over at her. She stared straight ahead, her pale face emotionless, her hands clutching the gift bag, like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. "You sure you're okay?" I asked, trying to break the tension. She nodded slowly but didn't turn to look at me. "It's been a hard year," she said quietly. "But thank you for stopping. Not many people would." I nodded, not sure what to say. The radio played softly, but even the cheerful Christmas carols couldn't cut through the uneasy silence. I kept stealing glances at her, trying to figure out what felt so off. After a while, she directed me to a small, quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of town. The houses were modest, their windows glowing warmly with Christmas lights. I pulled up in front of a quaint little home with a wreath on the door. "This is it," she said softly. "Thank you." I nodded. "Merry Christmas." She gave me a faint smile, opened the door, and stepped out into the snow. I watched as she walked up to the house, disappearing around the side. As soon as she was gone, the temperature in the car returned to normal. The heater finally seemed to kick in, and warm air blasted from the vents. I sat there for a moment, rubbing my hands together, trying to shake off the cold that had seeped into my bones. The next morning, the encounter was still on my mind. Something about her didn't sit right. I decided to take a drive back to the spot where I'd picked her up, thinking maybe I'd find some clue about who she was, or why she'd been out there. The snow had stopped, and the sun was peeking through the clouds as I pulled over to the side of the road. I got out, my boots crunching in the fresh snow. The area was quiet, the only sound, the occasional rustling of the wind through the trees. That's when I saw him. A man, probably in his late 50s, was standing a few yards away. He wore a heavy coat and gloves, and in his hands, he held a red sweater and a small wrapped gift. I watched as he carefully draped the sweater over a small wooden cross planted in the snow on the side of the road. The gift followed, placed gently at the base of the cross. I hesitated, then approached him. "Excuse me," I said softly. "I don't mean to intrude, but what happened here?" The man turned to me, his eyes filled with a sorrow that seemed to weigh him down. "This is where my wife died," he said, his voice trembling. 5 years ago, on Christmas Eve, she was hit by a car on her way home. My stomach dropped. I'm so sorry, I managed to say. I didn't know. He nodded, his gaze shifting back to the cross. I come here every year to bring her things. It's my way of keeping her memory alive. A cold shiver ran down my spine. Last night, I said hesitantly, I gave a woman a ride from this spot. She was wearing a red sweater and carrying a gift bag. The man's face went pale. He stared at me, his eyes wide. That's not possible, he whispered. You must be mistaken. I'm not, I insisted. She said she needed a ride into town, and I dropped her off at a house there. The man's eyes filled with tears, and he shook his head. That was her, he said, his voice breaking. Every year, people say they see her. She's still trying to get home. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold air. I looked back at the cross, the red sweater fluttering gently in the breeze. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. I had given a ride to a ghost. Without another word, the man turned and walked back to his car, leaving me standing there in the snow, my mind racing. I drove home in silence, the weight of the encounter settling heavily on my chest. That Christmas, I couldn't stop thinking about her. Wherever she was now, I hoped she had finally found her way home. Growing up, one of my favorite family traditions was picking out a Christmas tree. Every December, we'd bundle up in our winter coats, pile into the car, and head out to a local tree farm. It was always a fun day filled with laughter, hot cocoa, and a little friendly competition between my siblings and me to see who could find the best tree. One year, when I was about 10, my parents decided to shake things up by taking us to a new tree farm that had just opened. This one was much bigger than the one we usually went to, with acres of trees stretching endlessly in every direction. They even had a small shop selling ornaments, a fire pit where you could warm up with cider, and a few reindeer penned near the entrance. It felt magical, like stepping into a Christmas movie. The farm was bustling with families, and the atmosphere was cheerful. My parents gave us the usual warning to stay close, but as kids do, we got caught up in the excitement. My siblings, Sam, who was 12, and Lily, who was 8, and I convinced my parents to let us roam ahead while they lingered at the shop. We promised to meet back at the cider stand in 30 minutes. As we wandered through the rows of evergreens, we decided to play a quick game of hide and seek. It wasn't unusual for us to turn any outing into an opportunity for fun. I was it, so I closed my eyes and started counting while Sam and Lily scattered among the trees. When I finished counting, the quiet of the farm settled in around me. The rows of towering pines seemed to stretch endlessly, creating an eerie labyrinth. I started walking, calling out my siblings' names, half expecting them to jump out and scare me. Instead, I found him. He stepped out from behind one of the trees, tall, scruffy, and dressed in a worn-out jacket and a red cap that looked like it hadn't been washed in years. His face was pale, his eyes dull and sunken, and his hands were stuffed into the pockets of his coat. At first, I assumed he was one of the farm workers, but something about him seemed off. "You're not supposed to be running around in the trees," he said, his voice rough and gravelly. "It's dangerous." I froze, my heart skipping a beat. "I'm just looking for my brother and sister," I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. He gave me a thin, unsettling smile. "I work here. Let me help you find them. Come with me." I hesitated. His clothes didn't match the bright, cheerful uniforms I'd seen the other workers wearing, and he wasn't carrying any tools. No saw, No tag for marking trees, just empty hands and a stare that seemed too intense. "It's okay," I said, taking a step back. "I think I can find them." His smile faded, and he stepped closer. "You shouldn't be out here alone," he insisted, his tone sharp. "Come on, I'll take you to the front." Before I could respond, he grabbed my arm. Not hard, but firm enough that I couldn't easily pull away. Panic bubbled in my chest. "Let me go," I said, my voice shaking. He leaned in closer, his grip tightening. "Stop making a scene," he muttered. "You'll scare your siblings." At that moment, I heard Sam's voice in the distance. "Jess, where are you?" "I'm here," I screamed, twisting in the man's grip. The man's expression darkened. "Quiet," he snapped, glancing around nervously. But it was too late. Sam and Lily came crashing through the rows of trees, their faces filled with confusion and concern. As soon as the man saw them, he let go of my arm and took a step back, raising his hands like he was innocent. "Just trying to help," he said, his voice suddenly calm and smooth. She looked lost. Sam wasn't buying it. "Come on, Jess," he said, grabbing my hand. "Let's go." We hurried back toward the main area of the farm, the man watching us silently until we were out of sight. My heart was pounding, my arm still tingling where he'd grabbed me. When we reached my parents, we told them everything. My dad's face turned pale, then red with anger. He immediately reported the man to the farm's staff. Within minutes, a small group of workers and security were combing the area, but the man was gone. He had vanished into the maze of trees. Later, one of the workers told us they had no idea who he was. He didn't work there, and no one had seen him before. They called the police, who searched the area but found nothing. It was like he'd disappeared into thin air. We never went back to that tree farm, and to this day, the memory of that man haunts me. I still wonder what would have happened if Sam and Lily hadn't found me in time. Would he have taken me? Hurt me? I try not to think about it too much, but every December, as we set up our Christmas tree, the image of his cold, lifeless eyes creeps back into my mind. As the events manager for my company, I was tasked with organizing this year's office Christmas party. It was a lot of work, but I didn't mind. I loved the holidays, and seeing my coworkers laugh and enjoy themselves made it all worth it. The party was a hit, decorations on point, drinks flowing, and even the notoriously grumpy IT guy managed to crack a smile. But once the festivities ended, the real work began. Cleanup. Everyone filed out around 10 p.m., thanking me for a great time, and I was left alone to tear everything down. By 11:30 p.m., I had most of the decorations packed up and the trash bags by the door. The office was eerily quiet. The fluorescent lights hummed softly, and the faint scent of pine from the Christmas tree lingered in the air. I was exhausted but relieved to be almost done. After a final sweep of the conference room, I grabbed my coat and keys, ready to lock up. Just as I was about to turn off the lights, I heard a noise. A faint thump. I froze, my hand hovering over the light switch. It came from deeper inside the office, near the rows of cubicles. I glanced at the clock, 11:45 p.m. Everyone should have been long gone. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing in the empty space. No answer. I told myself it was probably just the building settling or maybe the janitor finishing up. But then I heard it again, a soft shuffling, like footsteps moving cautiously across the carpet. My heart began to race. I walked toward the source of the noise, clutching my phone in one hand, ready to dial 911 if necessary. As I approached the cubicles, the air felt heavier. The once festive office now cloaked in an unsettling silence. "Is someone there?" I asked, trying to sound confident. Still no response. I crept forward, peering around each corner. The overhead lights flickered slightly, casting unsettling shadows across the rows of desks. I reached the break room and hesitated, noticing the door was slightly ajar. It was closed earlier. I was sure of it. I pushed the door open slowly, revealing the dark room inside. Everything seemed in place, but just as I was about to turn around, I noticed something odd. One of the chairs was pulled out from the table, and a half-empty cup of punch sat beside it. Someone had been here recently. My stomach tightened. I backed out of the break room, my eyes darting around the office. Then, the noise came again, closer this time. The sound of slow, deliberate footsteps echoed from the far end of the hall, near the storage room. I turned toward the exit, my instincts screaming at me to leave. But before I could take more than a few steps, the lights at the end of the hall flickered and went out. The footsteps quickened. Panic surged through me. I broke into a sprint, heading for the front door. Just as I reached it, I realized with a sinking feeling that my keys were still on the conference room table. Behind me, the footsteps stopped. The silence was deafening, save for the sound of my own ragged breathing. "Whoever you are, I'm calling the police," I shouted, hoping to scare them off. Nothing. Then a voice, low and chilling, cut through the darkness. "You shouldn't be here alone." I spun around, my eyes scanning the dimly lit office. A figure stood at the far end of the hallway, partially obscured by the shadows. They didn't move, just stood there watching me. I bolted back toward the conference room, grabbing my keys off the table in one frantic motion. As I turned to run, I heard the sound of heavy footsteps thundering behind me, closing the distance fast. I didn't dare look back. Reaching the front door, I fumbled with the lock, my hands shaking uncontrollably. The footsteps were almost on top of me. When I finally managed to get the door open, I threw myself outside, slamming the door shut behind me and locking it. For a moment, I stood there, gasping for air, my eyes fixed on the darkened office through the glass door. The figure was standing on the other side, their face obscured by the shadows, just staring. I didn't wait to see what they would do next. I sprinted to my car, jumped in, and sped out of the parking lot, my heart pounding in my chest. The next day, I reported the incident to building security. They checked the cameras but found nothing. No sign of anyone else in the office after hours. But I know what I saw, and I'll never stay late at the office again. Thanks for stopping by the channel. We hope you enjoyed these 3 truly terrifying stories. If you want to hear more just like this one, subscribe to our channel and turn notifications on so you can be reminded when we post a new long-form video every Tuesday at 10 a.m. and a short video every Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday at 6 p.m. Central Time. If you have a story you'd like to hear read on the channel, email it to us at officialnightmarenarratives@gmail.com, and you might just hear your story read in a future episode. Thanks again for listening, and stay spooky, friends. We'll catch you in the next one.